All right, Matt, a new wardrobe and a new look on this Thursday night. We're getting ready for UFC 256, and we're days after original predictions, but we do have a late addition to the card. I know a lot of fights have been scrapped so far today already. Sergey Spivak and Jared Vanderaa is off this card, but in for Angela Hill, who's supposed to be taking on Tecia Torres, we now have Sam Hughes. Matt, Sampage has entered the chat, and maybe you're not hip to Sampage coming out of the Pacific Northwest, but Sam Hughes so far in her young MMA career, 5-1 as a pro. She's main evented an LFA card in the past. And Matt, I know Ed Soares, who runs the show down there with LFA, has kind of talked about the promotion in the certain terms that it's kind of like the college for UFC fighters. And we've seen that. A lot of really, really good high-level champions have come out of that legacy RFA, now LFA feeder league, and they've done a great job. So the next fighter coming out of that region, Sam Hughes, she headlined LFA 85, taking on Vanessa Demopoulos, the little monster. And in that fight, it was an all-action type of fight. I mean, Sam Hughes, if you've ever watched her fight, really good footwork, really good in and out motion. She moves her head quite a bit. She does tend to get hit, though, which is a little troubling, but she throws a really crisp jab that can really cut up her opponents. You saw that in the fight against Demopoulos. She won the first round. The second round she won, and it was considered a 10-8 because Demopoulos threw an illegal up kick at the very end of the round. In the third round, it was a Sam Hughes win. She's cruising with a 30-26, and if it was a 3-round fight, she won. It was a title fight. And in that fourth round, things started to get a little bit squirrely. She went down to the ground, and it was funny because on commentary, they said, oh, you know, very high fight IQ. And that was the biggest mistake that she could have made because Vanessa Demopoulos threw up one of the craziest Hail Mary submissions I've ever seen with a reverse triangle, had her in her legs. Wow. And it was one where she was already fishing for the leg lock. She was kind of playing around with the hands and then just kind of wiggled her legs up and got the submission and totally put Sam Hughes out. So Hughes went back to the drawing board, fought with LFA 93 back in October, picked up her own finish win. And if you look it up on Tapology, you'll see that it's at 5 minutes at the end of the first round. You'll think, well, geez, that's kind of like when Ricky Simone fought Rob Dvalishvili. It was, but in the fact that Sam Hughes was really piecing up her opponent on the feet. She was really landing that jab well. She does well. She pressures her opponents and pushes them up against the cage. But if you look at it, she was taking on, and I got to make sure, it was Danielle Hindley, and in that fight, pushed her up against the cage, got her into a guillotine, and just pulled it as tight as you could pull. And you kind of worry about a fighter doing that. You could gash your arms out. She absolutely did not. And when the round ended, she let her opponent go flat out on the mat, totally out. So she won that fight by finish, by guillotine, back in October. Matt, this is another fighter, and I've always struggled with this college in the States name. She was a track and field athlete and a cross-country athlete at Wofford. I always thought it was Wofford, but it's Wofford, so I learned something new today. And the reason why I bring that up, and I would even mention it, is the fact that her gas tank, we talk about fighters, they're on their bike. And there's certain fighters like Kamaru Usman and others where as the fight goes on, their output goes up. Gavin Tucker is fighting this weekend. Tony. He's a fighter kind of like that. Tony Ferguson as well. And for Sam Hughes, she can fight in that way where you never have to worry about her gas tank. It's always going to be there. You look at the losses that she had even on the amateur circuit because she just started fighting in 2016. From 16 to 18, her amateur career, she went 3-3-1. But all three of those losses by decision. Her one pro loss to Vanessa Demopoulos, who ended up going on to Contender Series, losing to Corey McKenna, and then lost her last fight coming back off Contender Series. But still, Sam Hughes, definitely a lot of potential. She's very, very young in her career. As I mentioned, I mean, only 5-1. She's taking on a really tough test in this fight.
Oh, yeah. Tecia Torres, she really is the gatekeeper at 115. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way at all. Because when you look at her losses, they are only to the highest level. You go through Rose Namajunas, former champ. Jessica Andrade, former champ. Joanna, arguably the GOAT of the weight class, of course, former champ, Weili Zhang. And then the only one that does kind of stand out was her last loss against Marina Rodriguez. It is a little off-putting, but I do think we can all agree Rodriguez is a really exciting prospect right now.
And I mean, Marina Rodriguez has a really big fight that was just announced as well. And she's one of those fighters where I know she lost her last fight, but there's definitely a lot of shine still with Tecia Torres, only 31 years old. And again, you're talking about the wins. former champ, now champ, and Rodriguez is right up there. So it's the highest level competition.
It really is. And what you said about Sam Hughes, I think, is really important. The fact that her cardio is going to be good for 15 minutes. Because with Tecia Torres, you know that's always going to be a factor. She's not someone who's going to go out there and finish a lot of her opponents. She's come close. The Michelle Waterson fight's one that I always like to bring up because she just dominated Waterson, and Waterson did not have an answer for the grappling of Tecia Torres. And it is very odd. I do think Torres' whole game does revolve around her takedowns and her ability to take down her opponent. Because when you do look at her losses, Jessica Andrade was able to take her down and kind of do to Torres really what Jessica Andrade does to everybody. And then Joanna, of course, really good defending the takedown and make her pay for it. Because that's the thing with Torres. She'll really commit to a single leg, but you can hit her while she's going for it. And you can really make her pay for it. Joanna did a great job at that. And so did Wei Li. So we have seen ways to beat Tecia Torres. But again, the only people who have really been able to implement that game plan is the elite of the elite at the weight class. So for Sam Hughes, it is a big ask in her UFC debut.
And the thing, too, with Sam Hughes compared to Tecia Torres' last opponent, Brianna Van Buren. Van Buren out-wrestled Torres. It was a closer fight than a lot of people might have you realize, I guess. I mean, Tecia Torres definitely did outland her opponent in that one. But it's kind of funny because when I watch Sam Hughes fight, and I'm not joking here, she fights like maybe a less refined Tecia Torres, like a younger Tecia Torres in her career. And it's weird because, you know, you look at Sam Hughes, 5-1, she's 28 years old. Tecia Torres, 11-5, and she's 31 years old. A lot of that experience coming in the UFC. She's been around since 2014, her win over Angela Magana. And I mean, I look at this fight, it's kind of tricky. You look at the odds, Tecia Torres open a -450 favorite. She's now just a hair under a 5-1 favorite. For Sam Hughes, open a +350. She's now at a +371. If you look over the votes on Tapology, exactly 1,000 when I wrote down the old paper notes. Tecia Torres, 87% of fans going with Torres, 90% picking her to win by decision. Tecia Torres only has one finish win on her record. She's got 10 wins total, one of them by submission. It was a Juliana Lima win. She won Performance of the Night in that one. And for Sam Hughes, I mean, you look at the record, 3 submission wins in her pro career. She has looked good. She's very busy. I like that finish that she had in her last opponent. You hate to discredit some wins, but I gotta tell you, I mean, Hindley didn't really look to the same caliber as a lot of the UFC fighters we have. She's coming out of Rockland, Mass, training with Joe Giannetti, who we've seen on top before. But all that to say, Sam Hughes is a good fighter, very busy. Maybe she pulls an upset here. I mean, if the way for Sam Hughes to win this fight, stay on your bike and fight a Tecia Torres fight. I mean, that's easy to say too.
Exactly, it's harder to...
For Sam Hughes, she's coming here at a Catalyst Fight House or Catalyst MMA. She spent some time training at American Top Team in Oklahoma City, and you might think, well, that's a weird place to train. But Emily Ducote, who's really, ever since she left Bellator and left Hector Lombard's gym, the old appendage on American Top Team in Florida, she's really started to rise to the occasion with Invicta. So for Hughes to take that initiative, train a bit with Ducote, cross things up a little bit, Pacific Northwest as well, I really do think that all of this bodes well for her overall MMA career. Great opportunity here in the UFC. I'm going to side with Tecia Torres here as a big favorite. But honestly, if I woke up Sunday morning and Sam Hughes pulled off a total upset victory, I think a lot of people would be surprised. I'm not lying, and I'm not just playing this up. I wouldn't be surprised if Sam Hughes makes this one competitive.
Okay, so surprised to make it competitive and surprised to win are two very different things. Again, you're asking someone in their UFC debut to beat a far more experienced and advanced version of themselves. And we kind of talked about it last weekend with Jamal Hill and Oben St. Preux. I feel like they were both at very different stages of their career, even though the comparison is somewhat similar. I just think Tecia Torres, unless you are the elite of that division, like Michelle Waterson is ranked above her right now. But in my mind, again, Tecia Torres, I know that fight was a while ago. I would probably favor Tecia Torres. Like, she's a really hard fight for anyone in the top 15. So it's a really hard ask for someone in their UFC debut to go up against Torres. So really hard to pick against Torres.
And the added X factor for Tecia Torres, you were training for a 3-round fight against Angela Hill. And how does Angela Hill fight? Extreme Muay Thai fighter, and she can get slippery if it goes to the ground. So you got to always watch out for her. But Matt, both going with Tecia Torres in this fight. Again, a little bit of denim on denim here this week.
Gonna dance all night.
Gonna dance all night. If you don't get that reference, you might not be Canadian or you might not be a country fan, but This Week in MMA is back with a relaunch. Make sure you check it out. We had Adrian Yanez coming on to talk about the state of the bantamweight division. Big win on Contender Series this summer. Performance of the night bonus in his UFC debut against Victor Rodriguez. He had some interesting takes in the bantamweight division as well, so make sure you check that out. We also had Tebe on. platinum selling Canadian country artist, really making moves. He had a new song come out in the last couple weeks, Shotgun Rider. So check that out here with Fight Night Picks, Matt. We're always keeping it locked in. And as we always say, with Fight Night Picks,
Let's get into it.